Hello, my lovely listeners. This is episode 58 of Keep Blooming, and I'm your host, Liz Montigny. You're about to listen to my last interview of the year. Since August, you've heard how other faith based women have reached their goals, and I hope you've been inspired, encouraged, and learned something new along the way. Speaking of new, next week, my final episode of the year will be a little Christmas gift for you and a little different from what you've been listening to for these almost 60 episodes. Then in January, we'll kick off my new monthly episode schedule. But right now, you're hearing from Sabrina Safranski, a wife, mom, stepmom, and entrepreneur, about what it means to let go of good things to make room for great things, and the everyday choices you must make to create a right ordered life centered on God, family, and then all the rest. Let's get growing and keep blooming. Tired of overthinking your next step? Do you want simple steps to level up your mind, body, and spirit? Or maybe you need some inspiration to reach your goal? Then you've tuned into the right podcast. This is Keep Blooming, and I'm your host, Liz Montigny. Each week, I'll encourage you to drop the hustle mentality for hope and act on the dreams God has put on your heart. Like you, I'm doing all the things as a Catholic, a wife, a mom to 3 boys, and a licensed Ziegler coach. So let's get growing and keep blooming. Hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome to the podcast of Keep Blooming. I'm your host, Liz Montigny, and today's guest is Sabrina Safranski. Sabrina, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Good. Well, I think we have a lot to cover today because Sabrina has got her hands in a little bit of everything. So I want to let you know what she's up to. Sabrina is a Catholic wife and mom who runs both her own tutoring businesses, as well as a couple of side projects related to health, wellness, and beauty. Her primary goal is to be the wife and mother that God is calling her to be. And when the time comes, be able to homeschool her children. Originally from Pittsburgh, Sabrina now lives outside of Baltimore, Maryland, with her husband, Brad, and their children, Kateri, Arthur, and Giovanna. All right. Well, I know when my kids were little, I was always thinking about what's something I could do, but I could still be with them. And that kind of sounds like what you're doing in a way. Tell me a little bit more about all these things that you have going on.
So I should clarify that Kateri and Arthur are my stepchildren. They live most of the time in Houston, but they're a big part of what I do and what I have done. So I wanted to make sure that I clarified where they are because it kind of plays into this a little bit. So I started my tutoring business over 10 years ago. I am a private tutor through a specific website that's kind of a clearinghouse, much like Uber is for drivers and Airbnb is, or Vrbo, whatever it is now, is for it's basically a clearinghouse of tutors where people can go on and find specific tutors for specific things. The tutors can go find students, that kind of thing. And I started that after having left the teaching profession more than 10 years ago. And it kind of facilitated my ability to meet and date and then marry my husband and move here to Baltimore because everything that I do is, and even when we got married back in 2019, prior to the pandemic, everything was pretty much remote at that point. So, I mean, he was very concerned when we first started dating. He was like, how is this going to affect your business? I was like, the background on my computer will change. Like, that's pretty much it. So it really didn't affect my business at all. So I started tutoring, took it full time within a year of when I started it. But it has facilitated a number of different things. My 2 stepchildren, Kateri and Arthur, live in Houston with their mom and stepdad most of the time. But we chose to homeschool last year, and I was a large part of that. And I was able to homeschool them remotely. Their mother and I split because she was working full time outside of the home. We split the homeschooling duties, and I did the larger portion of it because I had that ability. And actually, it facilitated them being here with us for several weeks in the spring to be able to do some face to face learning and things like that, and get caught up for any time that we missed due to various scheduling challenges. It also has facilitated, like I said, my dating and marriage, engagement and marriage to my husband and moving here. But what we didn't anticipate was the pandemic. Obviously, we didn't
Mm.
anticipate that, but also we got pregnant with Giovanna, our toddler, our 3-year-old, when in the midst of the pandemic. So she was due to be born in December, late December, December 27th of 2020, and she was more than 3 months premature. She was
Wow.
born almost 26 weeks. We think we were 10 hours from the 26-week mark. Um,
Mm.
so we spent over 4 months in NICU. And I was blessed to be able to sit at her bedside with my computer and continue doing what I was doing with my teeny tiny little baby, like laying on my chest. And so that was just such a beautiful blend of home and work, and being able to make the choice to continue to work so I could take some time off when she did come home, to be able to have that support from my students. My students all knew what was going on. They were staying up with what was happening with her.
Mm.
So to be able to have that support and not have to ask anybody for permission to take time off, to not have to ask anybody for, whatever I needed, other than letting my students know, hey, I'm not doing this day because of whatever. It's just been a beautiful blend, and is facilitated. I've taught students in, I think, almost all 50 states, as well as all over the world. I've had students I have a student in France right now. I've had students in Italy, and I have one student that he lives in Texas and then summers in London. So, just a variety of different things, and being able to facilitate my schedule and be able to set aside specific time that I'm going to spend with my family. It's just a really beautiful marriage of
Mm.
work and home.
I'd love to unpack more of that with you. And I think that is the gift of not only this online world, but entrepreneurship. As hard as it is, you, especially as a mom and a woman, you have that flexibility. And anybody who is listening to this and thinking, oh, I can't do it, I beg to differ with the amount in various backgrounds that we've had of guests on the show. I would hope that at this point in listening, you would know you can do it. And there's certainly in Sabrina's story too. So before I ask you some of those questions about, what you're doing and how you got there and all that good stuff, for those of you who've been listening, I like to start our conversations with a little Lectio Divina, a little abbreviated version of that. Sabrina picked kind of a hot one for our current culture, but I think it's so misunderstood. So I'm looking forward to this conversation about it.
Amen to that.
Yes, very good. So this is Ephesians 5:21-33. Be subordinate to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives should be subordinate to their husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of his wife, just as Christ is head of the church, he himself the Savior of the body. As the church is subordinate to Christ, so wives should be subordinate to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over for her, to sanctify her, cleansing her by the bath of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. So also husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one hates his own flesh, but rather nourishes and cherishes it, even as Christ does the church. Because we are members of his body, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak in reference to Christ and the church. In any case, each one of you should love his wife as himself, and the wife should respect her husband. I think people take this out of context in so many ways and don't quite understand what's going on here. But when you read the whole passage and you also put it in light of the relationship of man, woman, husband, wife, and God, and what Christ came to do, it makes a whole lot more sense. And it's actually not as controversial Some people make it out to me, but I'm
Yeah.
super curious what prompted you to share this particular passage.
I shared with you a little bit earlier, I specifically sought this reading out
Mhm.
for our wedding. It was the second reading at our wedding. And I remember when we selected it, the priest, who is a dear old friend of mine from home, said, "Nobody ever picks that one, Sabrina." and, and I was like, I know. and so he actually commented on it in the homily at our wedding, that like nobody picks this passage because they misunderstand it. And I remember as a teenager, a young teenager, like hearing this passage at like, and of course my ears shut off after I heard subordinate to their husband. My ears
Right.
shut off at like 13, 14 years old, like, oh my gosh, what is he saying? And I remember saying something to my mom about it, and my mom was like, keep reading.
Ah.
and so I did, and she was like, you have to get to the next line. She said people always stop after the subordinate part, and they don't read the next part where it says husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. And she said, if your husband is loving you properly, he's not disregarding you. He's not like, yes, you're being subordinate. Yes, he's making, somebody has to make the ultimate decision. So the husband makes the ultimate decision, and yes, you defer to him. That doesn't mean he's not going to take your opinion into consideration. That's not that he, that doesn't mean that he's not going to do what's right for you and for your family. It's that the husband is head of the household. And when I started thinking about that, even as a teenager, it was like, okay, that makes sense. And when my husband and I started dating, it was kind of funny. We were dating long distance, so some Sundays we were together to go to church together, and some Sundays we were 200 miles apart.
Mm.
And he was like, there was a Sunday where this was the reading, and he was like, did you get the truncated version, or did they do like the whole thing? He's like, I feel like it's Ephesians 5 censorship day. And I was like, I know, right? Because his church had truncated it. I said, no, mine read the whole thing. Like they actually read the whole thing. He said, I'm surprised. I said, I was a little surprised too. It was a little bit like, I was like, it sometimes creates a little bit of a hot button issue. I said, but if people listen to the whole thing, like, it doesn't make sense out of context. It only makes sense in the full context of the passage, because I said, I understand why people get like all like put out of sorts about it, because they're not hearing the entire, you have to listen the whole way through in order to understand what's happening. And when you get to the comparison between like how Christ is head of the church, Christ is his church, Christ is the head, and the church is his wife,
Mm.
just so the husband and the wife. And I was always taught through business, through mentorship, that when you have proper vertical alignment, God, family, business,
Mhm.
that everything kind of falls into place. And I have found that to be very true. So this, I always go back to this. We actually, in addition to this being the reading, we put together little olive oil things, and the verse was on the olive oil as well, the label for the olive oil for our wedding, so that everybody could go home and reread the passage and reference it.
Thanks for clarifying all that. And I think it's important to read the whole thing, because you're absolutely right. When you hear those other verses, it's not a dismissal of the woman, of the wife. And I absolutely hear what you're saying too. I've heard this so many times in business, but oftentimes for me personally, it took a while to sink in, is just the right order of
Mhm.
things. It's
Absolutely.
it's your relationship with God, your relationship with your spouse, and then all the other stuff. And that's something that I've been really sitting with for quite a while, and kind of examining, has it been right ordered? Where hasn't it been? How can that get corrected? Because it's all fixable. None of that is meant to beat yourself up over if you're kind of feeling like you're disordered in that area. It's not. You just sit down and pray about it and reflect on it. And what I have found is, when you do start getting in alignment and in the right order of things, a lot of peace and freedom comes. Now, when I read your bio, and when in talking with you here a little bit so far, you're building the life that you want, but also you're building the life that you feel is in right ordered.
Mhm. And
And
I want
Yeah.
to clarify that I'm not always perfect about it. I screw up more than I'd like to admit. Like there are times
Mhm.
that it was like I have to go back and reflect on that and say, like, did I respect my husband there?
Yeah.
Did I let him love me the right way there?
Mhm.
Like what did I listen to what he was saying and hear him, hear the his desire for what's right for our family. Because my husband's a very devout Catholic as well, and he leads this family very, very well. And having been single and independent for so long, sometimes it's hard for me to like
Mm.
defer, but I know that that's the right thing to do. Um, and he's never made a decision that has been detrimental to us. So like it's just a matter of
Mhm.
learning to trust. And I think that that's
Yeah.
an ongoing process for a lot of people.
And that's a good point too, especially, if you've been in singlehood for a while and now you're in a relationship, or maybe it's not even that, it's just your background, your upbringing, whatever it is, has,
Mhm.
has made it so that no, I do this and I know what I'm doing. And so things have to change. It can be uncomfortable, and you do have to, have those check-ins with yourself. And what I hear too is that none of that is easy, you
Mhm.
know, and whether I'm hearing that from other women that I work with or just me personally. And, something you said when we were talking about your introduction and just how, your daughter was premature.
Mhm.
And first of all, just being in the NICU, that's intense.
Yep.
But making, I can only imagine. But, when I heard you say, she was laying on me, but I was still working. Initially, I was like, whoa, that's a hard choice. But you made that choice because when she came home, you could be a family uninterrupted,
Right.
which I think, especially in kind of world we're living in now where it's instant gratification, or, you're not supposed to suffer and all those things, that those are the kinds of harder choices we have to make
Mhm.
to get ultimately to the vision that we want later. And so I'm sure that was a hard choice for you to be like, I'm going to do these things with
What
her.
would it what would have been harder was not being able to be there because I was under somebody else's
Mm,
authority as far as having to be at work and having to make the choice. Do I take my maternity leave now or do I wait until she's home? And all
mm,
of those kinds of things. The choice to be there and continue to work and be able to hold her simultaneously was the was it was such a beautiful we had such a beautiful ability to do that. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't pandemic based. I mean, for my husband it was. My husband's work from home started out of the pandemic. He's an engineer, and so his was go to work every day until the pandemic hit. So
yeah, yeah.
him being able to have that flexibility and be able to bring his computer, and both of us sitting there next to each other working while holding her and letting her sleep and just being there with her in the NICU was an absolutely, like, we look back on it, we're like, what a blessing that we have
Mm,
that ability.
mhm,
It was a hard 4 months. It was a really, like, it was the hardest 4 months of our lives. And the ability to be able to say, I can be here, I don't have to go to work, I can bring my work here with me, I can set up my computer here, I can hold her and TMI, hold her and be on the breast pump and
yeah.
have my screen off and tutor with my students and everything, all at the same time was amazing. And I look back on that and I'm like, I don't know. I know a lot of parents who had preemies pre-pandemic that had to go to work for 8 hours and then go over and see their babies. And even when we were in NICU, there were some parents, they had to drive over 100 miles one way to come to. We were at Johns Hopkins. I mean, praise God, that was
Mm,
amazing.
mhm.
But there were people that, with a level 4 NICU, they had the closest level 4 NICU was over 100 miles away. So they only could come see their babies on the weekend. So
Oh,
just being able to say, like, my baby's only 25 minutes away, I can take my computer and go there and be with her as long as I want to be, like, was just such a gift. It was such
yeah.
a gift, and it played into our faith as well. We had an amazing team of prayer warriors who prayed her home. And for the gestation that she was born at, the number of problems that she didn't have was amazing. The fact that
Wow.
she's a healthy, happy 3-year-old today is
Yeah.
just, we're
Mm.
beyond grateful for all of the opportunities that came out of my choice to start
Yes.
to start a business and to be able to choose how I spent my time.
Yeah, that's so important, that phrase, be able to choose how I spend my time. And that's what so many women are striving for. So along those lines, you said you were a teacher
Mhm.
and then you got into tutoring. How did you make that choice to get into tutoring?
Tutoring fell into my lap kind of by accident. It was all God. Really. I had been in the public school system for over a decade. My last position was I loved my students. I loved what I was doing. My background's music education. I was a middle school band director at that point. I love the middle school age group. It was a blast. We had a great time. But the school district that I was in, right around that time, budget cuts across the state of Pennsylvania started to happen. And because I was the newest in to the school district, the first one out.
Mm-hmm.
So my position was eliminated. They tried to eliminate it after the first year that I was there, and the parents fought, and we were able to get the position back. And then the second year, there was just no saving it. While I was substitute teaching, trying to get back into the field, I was just looking for whatever else I could do to supplement it. And the website just kind of fell into my lap. And I was a little bit skeptical. I was like, what is this? I've never seen this before. This was back in 2012. Back in 2012. And I remember looking at the website and going, like, I've never heard of this website before. Like, is this for real? And I did all my homework on it, made sure that it was right with the Better Business Bureau, that there were no disputes, that it was a legit website, that it had an actual phone number that I could call and find out about.
Yeah.
Sure enough, it was. And I spent the first couple of months just trying to get one student. I remember just trying to get that first start, because you have no star ratings and you have no parent reviews and you have nothing on there at that point. I was like, I just need to get one person. And at the time, it was also me traveling. It wasn't online at that point. It was mostly face to face. And I finally got that one student, and then I got a review, and I got star ratings, and everything started to roll, and I got a second student. And that was by the summer of 2013. I was still trying to get back in for a full-time position in a school district. And I remember just like being so frustrated, because I had never, at that point in my career, I'd never gone on a second interview that I hadn't gotten the job.
Mm.
And I was going on second interviews and third interviews, and in one case, fourth interview, and not getting jobs. And I was like, dear God, what is happening? Like, help me. Like, I don't understand. I'm so frustrated. And why did you leave me? Not a much longer story, but why did you leave me back into education for all of this? Like, I just don't
Yeah.
understand. And there was one job that I interviewed for. I'd done 3 interviews. I felt really good about everything. And I was like, we'll call you by this time tomorrow if you have the job. And like, I sat by the phone, and that call never came. And I
Mhm.
remember just sobbing and crying, and I couldn't understand why, and kind of screaming at God, trying like, why? And I remember I can't remember why I had to go over to the church that I belonged to. And I came back, and I had 3 new student requests through the website. And I was like, all of a sudden, I just kind of froze, and I was like, wait a second. I started running the numbers, and I sat there, and I looked at them, and I said to my mom, okay, can I just talk through something? She's like, yeah, sure. And I said, if I get X number of students, I'll make X amount of dollars. I said, that's more than I ever made in the public school system. And
Yeah.
she was like, yeah. I'm like, if I get that money, I don't think I ever have to go back. And
Mm.
she was like, is there a question here? And I went, no, just kind of needed to talk it out. And I called my mentors, my business mentors, and I talked it out with them too. And they basically the same thing. Is there a question here? Like, I don't think there's any question about where you should go with this right now.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And I finished a long-term sub stint in a friend of mine called and said, please come in, I'm pregnant. Like, please come in and sub for me for 2 months. That's it. Like, just 2 months. And I was like, okay, you got 2 months. That's it. And then I'm done. And I went in and I left her classroom, and I never went back into public education after that, because I was making more money in my after school hours than I was making working during the day.
That's incredible.
And so, yeah, at that point, I took it full time. It helped write my finances, which was a big problem at the time after having kind of been forced out of education. It helped me write my finances. It helped me to get things realigned. And at that point, I was doing a lot with my church. I was the RCIA director, and I was a catechist and in the choir and the bell choir, and just doing too many things with the church.
Yeah.
And and stupidly asking God, why couldn't I find a holy spouse? Because, like, you don't have time to find a holy spouse.
Right.
Um, so so I actually, like, I prayed a lot about that. There was the sister that ran a religious education program at the church, and I sat down with her and I was like, this is where I'm at. And she was like, I think that you need to, like, pray about it and see where, like, what you need to let go of and what you need to keep in your life. And
Mm.
I did that. And literally within months, I met my husband on Catholic Match.
Oh, yeah.
And the rest is kind of history. But that getting into it was, you know, it was kind of a long process where God literally had to kind of, hello, like, I've been putting in
Right.
your lap. Here I was on my knees all the time praying, like, God, just lead me wherever you want me to go. Tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. Thinking stupidly that I knew the will of God, that I needed to be back in the public school system, when he was putting in my life, right there in front of
Yeah.
me, my business, exactly what he wanted me to be doing.
Yeah. That's
So,
incredible. That's a great story. And I also met my husband on Catholic Match. Yeah, and when I'm hearing both in your NICU story and in getting laid off and then starting your own business, those are really in the fire moments, but the blessing and the gift that comes out of them, God always makes good out of it, which when we're in it, it's so hard to see. So,
mhm.
thank you for bringing us along for the full story so that we can hear that. And another thing that I hear too is women questioning, oh, should I do this business, or, should I branch out in this way? And they're so hesitant about it. And I always ask, well, what does that look like? Like, get curious about it. Because oftentimes what I hear is that they don't even have all the facts, or they don't even have all the numbers. And I'm not bashing them in any way, but it's just that there's this sense that that's not for me, or there's just a fear behind taking the next step. When oftentimes taking the next step, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to leap. It just means getting more information. So I love that story of running the numbers and talking to your mom and your mentors. And I think that's so important too, to hear yourself say those things, and also to get the feedback too, that no, you're not crazy. This sounds totally doable. And I think that's important to see, especially when we're talking about maybe more unconventional things, right? Like, you have the conventional 9 to 5, you're a teacher or whatever it is, and then you're still teaching, but in a very different way.
Mhm.
And so, giving yourself that permission to go and look for it, I think is important to hear. The other thing that you said when you were talking about, finding a spouse, a holy spouse, and making the priority for that. And that's another thing that so many of us wrestle with is, well, I want to make this a priority. So guess what? You have to start letting some things go.
Mhm.
And that again can be uncomfortable, but you can't welcome the next thing, receive the next thing, if you're still holding on to all these other things.
Right.
So when you were thinking about that, how did that process go for you? The idea of, I got to let this go.
There's kind of a lot to that, and I'll
Mm.
give you the Reader's Digest version of it. But
Yeah.
the at one point I was actually, like, tutoring, working part-time at Kohl's, which is my favorite department store. Shout out to Kohl's. But working at Kohl's, and then, substitute teaching here and there. And so I was doing a lot of different things, and then spending, like, my whole weekend at the church. And, I heard God whisper, like, where in your life do you have time for a family? You know?
Mm.
And it was one of these things. And at the time, like my tutoring business started to take off. I left, even substitute teaching at that point. And, that was right around the same time where that friend had, was on maternity leave. And so it was right around that same time. I was like, okay, I'm letting go of teaching. But then it was like, I'm working at Kohl's on the weekends and tutoring all week. Like, I've got to let go of Kohl's. And I had a lot of friends. I'd been there off and on for a number of years. And I went to them and I always like, my tutoring business is really taking off. Like, I just, as much as I love this and I love the discount, but I've got to let this go. Like, it's just not working for me anymore. And they like, congratulations, go for it. They were super, super supportive, which was such a
Mhm.
blessing. So then it was just my tutoring and working at the church. And I was still like, I'm so busy all the time. And I remember thinking, like, if I was dating somebody, I would need to have a Saturday or a Sunday to be able to spend to get to know this person
Mhm.
better. And if I'm spending half of my Saturday tutoring and then doing stuff at the church all day Sunday, like that leaves me with one little window of time. And that's really not enough. That doesn't leave any time for peace in my life, any time for anything else. And so I started with, maybe I don't need to be in the choir and the bell choir anymore, but I was still RCIA director teaching, catechist. I was kind of the sister that ran the program. I was kind of like her right hand lady. And it was so hard to get catechists at that church that I was like, I don't want to leave her in the lurch. Like,
Mm.
I just can't do that to her. She's such a sweet person. And I just like, it would hurt me to do that to her because I know how hard this is for her to, I don't want her to have to be the one to jump in to run this. She does so much. And our priest retired and a new priest came in, and in trying to fix some of the budget things, like cut her hours to a point where she had to go find another job. And so she called me in and she said, and because I was praying for guidance, I was like, I really like my heart, my mind, my soul, like I liked doing it, but I didn't feel the passion for it that I had
Mm. Mhm.
originally. And I was like, God, I feel like it's time for me to let go, but I just don't want to leave her in the lurch. And she called me in and she was like, I'm leaving. And I went, then I am too.
Mm.
And she was like, I kind of had a feeling you might say that. She said, I know that you've been praying for guidance in this. And I was like, yeah. So she was kind of a spiritual mentor to me too.
Right.
And she told me when she was writing her resignation letter, and I said, okay, I'll submit mine a couple of days after that. So what I kind of found out, and I submitted it and didn't hear back from the priest, which I was a little hurt over. Like, I'd been really dedicated, and I was like, no response to this whatsoever. But I didn't know at the time was he was about to offer me her position. And so my
Ah,
resignation came on the heels of him offering me her job.
wow.
And I was like, I'm glad that I didn't have to say no to that. I'm really glad that I didn't have to say no to that because I was already gone. But what was
Mm.
happening, the reason he didn't respond was he was kind of scrambling to figure out what to do because he expected me to take over for her.
Right, right, right.
And I met my husband on Catholic Mass 3 days later.
Ah,
On Memorial Day Monday, we were driving on Friday. He and
yeah.
I messaged each other for the first time on Memorial Day.
Uh,
So it was literally 3 days.
mhm.
And it was, seeing how like that chapter of my life, I literally, that door closed and the next door just literally opened three
Yes.
days later.
Yeah.
Was just, I was like, if God's hand wasn't in this, I don't know what I'd ever see God's hand in, because it was so in that mix, so in the
Right.
timing of everything. In For us, it was amazing.
And that's that phrase you always hear, God closes one door and opens another. But you don't always hear the actual illustration of that.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
mean,
really
it
important.
was like smack you in the face. Here you go. Like,
Yeah.
closing this door, opening this one. He was right there in all of it. And I've in our birth date group, I'm one of the older members of the birth date group for our toddler. Got a lot of close friends out of that group. It was a really, really magical Catholic birth date group. So I was talking to one of the girls who's significantly younger than me one time, and she was like, I don't understand why all of this is happening. And I was like, I don't mean to sound like old fogey, like I know more than you do. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I was like, but understand that you're not going to see it now. You're going to see it 5 or 10 years from now. Like
Yeah.
you're going to look back and understand like how the course of your life ended up to get you to this place. I said, and I say that from experience because I spent a lot of time in your shoes going, gosh, why is this happening? Why are we having this happen? Like, why is this thing going wrong? Why is this thing happening? I said, and I see that every step led me to where I am right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so you have to let it play out. You have to
Yeah.
trust God and like move forward and see where God's asking you to go next. And
Yeah.
I promise you it will make sense in 10 years, but it's not going to make sense right now. So don't expect it to.
Right, exactly. We're always so hung up on the how, and that's not really our job. It's to just be in the present moment and take the next step. There's busy, which is like filling up space.
Mhm.
It's just filling up space. And then there's being productive and intentional where progress is actually happening,
Mhm.
right? So I really think you need to stop and take a look at, if your life is full, is it busy or is it productive? And I think that's important to take a look at so that you have room to receive, these different things. Now, when I hear your journey, and then of course, you've got the tutoring business and you have children, and what do you think has been some of the most helpful things to, quote unquote, balancing all of that?
So I'm still learning.
Mhm.
I'm wet paint. It's a learning process for sure.
Mhm.
But I have found, I remember early on, after Giovanna came home from NICU, saying to some of the other moms in my birthday group, like, how do I get a hot cup of coffee by myself? Like, how does that happen?
Right.
And, and I got lots of advice, lots of feedback on that, and it was good. But I recently found like I had to make some choices to change my lifestyle a little bit. And what I mean by that is my baby is a good sleeper. She sleeps till like 8:30, 9 o'clock every day. She has like her whole life. Most moms don't get that. And I
No.
get that. I totally
Mhm.
get that. Most babies are up at like 6 o'clock in the morning. That is not my daughter, thankfully. But I was tending to, okay, I'll get up when she wakes up.
Right.
And I was finding that by noon, I was frustrated and I was aggravated and I was feeling out of sorts. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make some changes. And I started getting up at around 7 every day and going down. And I love Hallow, that app for prayer,
Yes.
and getting my hot cup of coffee and sitting down with Hallow and doing the women's daily devotional, listening to the mass readings for the day, listening to a reflection on the mass readings, and then something else. And it was like this half an hour of prayer and coffee for me. So
Mhm.
it was usually, and that's all it really takes is that half an hour, that half an hour. And I just found that change, making that change, getting up a little bit earlier, even though I love sleep, getting up a little bit earlier, having that half an hour to myself made me better for
Yeah.
my students. It made me better for my family. It made me a more patient, calmer mom, and ultimately more productive throughout the day because I got things going faster during
Mhm.
the day, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on me time. So I found that self-care, like little moments of self-care, are hugely important. And that half an hour in the morning is like my dedicated time. But throughout the day, I try to like listen to part of a book that I'm reading. Like I try to do a lot with, I love to read, so I try to do a lot with Audible to be able to like multitask a little bit more and
Right.
listen. And sometimes like I'll get through a chapter and go like, I have no idea what just happened in that chapter. Rewind, you know.
Yeah.
And, like I'm gonna do that one again because I wasn't really focused on it. I'll listen. I'll listen to that. I'll take time when she's napping to do something for me so that I can kind of re-energize in the midst of the day, whether that's like watching an episode of a TV show that I like, or just kind of like taking a walk, or because my husband's here, I can go out and take a walk while he's working, she's sleeping, I'm doing something for myself. So just taking those moments of self-care to have that balance, because it is hard. I got up this morning, I taught a lesson, and this is another thing, because of the flexibility of his job, he starts work a little bit later. He tends to pull her into bed with him for a little while so she binges Cocomelon a little bit in the morning. So she watches a little bit of Cocomelon. He gets a little extra rest. I can do something else downstairs. And then, I have that energy and that focus that I wasn't getting before. So taking those moments to find little windows that you can do something for yourself. The other thing is, and this was a hard thing for me to admit. I needed to learn how to accept help and ask for help when I needed it. And in the case of our daughter, she's a very energetic 3-year-old. She is a climber, which I was not at her age. She's much more energetic than I was at her age, and a lot more busy than I was. And I said, I need help during lessons in the middle of the day. And my husband is working in that window. He's got meetings and things. And I said to him, like, I think we need to find an in-home babysitter, like a mommy's helper babysitter that can come just a couple of days a week, like in my busiest windows, to play with her and occupy her so that I can do what I need to do and be more effective with my work. And admitting that I needed that help was very hard. I wanted to think that I could do it all and I didn't need anybody's help doing it. And being able to say no, like I need to get some help in here. Because ultimately my goal is to be able to homeschool her. That means I have to be able to back off on my tutoring. And in order to back off on my tutoring, I want to continue to, get my finances where I want them to be. NICU was a little bit of a setback on our finances, for sure. Overcoming those challenges and knowing, like, this is my goal, this is where I need to go, this is when we need to do it by, and this is how we need to go about it. And focusing on those things has brought a lot of balance into our lives, because it has given us the wherewithal to just continue working towards our goal.
Yes, yes. And I, 3 things I hear in there: making some subtle changes to your lifestyle. We hear it so often, the getting up early because it works.
It does, but it's not fun.
It's not fun. No, I hear you. And that's a big change I needed to make when my kids were younger. And it wasn't that I got up at 5 a.m. It was just getting up ahead of them.
Yep.
Just so I could have a moment. And I remember same thing from my mom. I would always come down the stairs and she'd be sipping her tea, and that's why. So that always starts the night before too. So, taking care of yourself the night before so that you can do that is key. And I loved what you said about little windows of self-care. That I always encourage my clients to have a list of like 3 things that are either free or super cheap that you can always look to and say, okay, I have this little window here. Can I go for this walk, or can I read this book? And so I like that you shared that, because that just gives you that moment to
even just lighting a candle and just being able to just be serene for a couple minutes, or listening to a quiet piece of music, just something, even an uplifting, like exciting piece of music, 5-minute, self dance party,
yeah, totally.
Just these little quick moments that help you just to rejuvenate and be a better version of yourself.
Exactly. And that's the key thing is, do you want to be a bear with your family and maybe not be as productive with your business, or do you want to be present, and that asking and accepting for help, it's so hard because we're kind of programmed not to, but wow, what freedom can come from that. So I'm glad you touched on that, because that's not
and our babysitter's been such a blessing. She's wonderful.
Before we hear about how we can connect with you and all those good things, I'm going to bring us back to that scripture passage. This is Ephesians 5, verses 21 to 33. Be subordinate to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives should be subordinate to their husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of his wife, just as Christ is head of the church, he himself the Savior of the body. As the church is subordinate to Christ, so wives should be subordinate to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over for her, to sanctify her, cleansing her by the bath of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. So also husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one hates his own flesh, but rather nourishes and cherishes it, even as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak in reference to Christ and the church. In any case, each one of you should love his wife as himself, and the wife should respect her husband. Kind of sums it up there in the last two verses, right?
Yeah. I love that the very first line too. Can you scroll up real quick?
Yeah.
The be subordinate to one another out of reverence for Christ. Like that's why you're doing it. Out of reverence for Christ. Like that just, I love that line. Like you're not doing you're not doing it for the world. You're doing it out of reverence for Christ.
Yes, that spoke to me as well the second time around. And, a lot of our conflict, indecision, and so forth in our lives, whether it be personal or professional, comes from the fact that we're paying attention to what the world wants, as opposed to out of reverence for Christ, as it says in the scripture. So if we can take that moment to pause and really think of, well, am I doing what the world wants, or am I doing what the Lord wants? That can change a lot of decisions and save a lot of anxiety.
Yep.
Not saying that it's easy. I think that's
not at all.
No,
not at all easy.
That's ultimately where we need to make our decisions, and we forget that. It's easy to. So Sabrina, tell us, how do we follow you? Maybe somebody's listening who needs a tutor, tell us all those things.
I included in the list of links, my tutoring website is on there. Also, the products that I use for health and wellness and beauty, there's links for those websites as well, my personal websites. And if anybody wants to connect to get advice on anything, I actually, through that beauty business for a while, I was a wedding makeup artist. I didn't touch on that at all or anything like that, but I did wedding and event makeup. So those two product websites, and like I said, I'm willing to connect with anybody who needs advice, who needs help choosing what they need. Just, I'm very well trained in both the beauty and the health and wellness aspect of it, to be able to recommend products to help keep you within a budget, all of those kinds of things, because the budgeting aspect is super important to a lot of people, and to help understand why the supplements I chose are the ones that I chose, because of the quality of the product and how they're tested and everything like that. But my tutoring website is on there. My specializations there is mostly test prep. Actually, I do SAT, ACT, GRE, LSAT, GMAT, like the alphabet soup of all of the standardized tests. So anybody who's looking for help in those arenas, or for their kids, even stuff for private schools, SSAT, ISEE, people that are in that world know what those are. And general just help with writing and reading and math, that kind of stuff. So lots going on there. It's busy and it's fun, and I love what I do.
Very good. Yes, this is all in the show notes. And listeners, I hope you heard in my conversation with Sabrina and all these other conversations you've been listening on the podcast, is that your life is yours. It's not going to look like anybody else's, and that's between you and God. And know that if you are feeling called to make some changes, there's a reason for that, and you should spend some time in that with the Lord. So I certainly heard that in Sabrina's journey, and I hope you did as well. So Sabrina, again, thank you for sharing your journey with us, and
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Very good. And to all of you listening, let's get growing and keep blooming. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Keep Blooming. Tune in every Wednesday for a dose of hope and encouragement. To be the first to know about my upcoming retreats and latest offerings, become an email subscriber at lizmontignycoaching.com. Have a wonderful week, and remember to keep blooming.